This is BYU Sports Nation, brought to you by the BYU Store, simulcast on BYU TV and BYU Radio. Now, from Studio B, here's Spencer Linton and Jarom Jordan.
BYU Sports Nation is live on a Monday. Your day-to-day play-by-play back in Studio B, presented by the BYU Store, official outfitter of BYU fans everywhere. It is September 20th. BYU football is still undefeated. Wherever and however you're connected, great to have you with us. I am Spencer Linton, teamed up alongside a man who is campaigning for a certain BYU guy to get into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. His name is Jarom Jordan.
It's Tyler Algier. After that play, that play is one of the greatest in BYU history. Just unbelievable. Tyler Algier, after an interception by Jaren Hall, chases down the interceptor and then goes into linebacker mode, sheds a defender, left shoulder down, right, punch in, and gets Superman the ball out.
Punch.
And Jaren Hall recovers this ball. Oh, the hustle by both of those guys. Unfreaking believable. Amazing play. So, yes, he should be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a theater near you this fall, perhaps in Spider-Man.
I love that he just got up and didn't even turn around to look at the play. He just kind of like, whatever, started walking back to the huddle, like, okay.
He's probably really tired.
That just happened, so what's next? Jaron, you got the ball. Okay, cool. What are we doing now?
We just lost 60 yards. Yeah, he did the cool guys don't look at explosions thing.
Tyler Algier. Yes, he went in full-on linebacker mode. Superman punch. That was like an MMA move. Like, that was incredible.
Yeah, it was gnarly. Like, he had to have practiced that before. There's no way you just bust that out in the moment.
He saved the game.
He was a linebacker.
Tyler Algier saved the game. He saved the game, which is why he belongs, well, he's kind of saved the BYU fan universe, right? So he
avenged the interception.
He does belong in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
We're not the Revengers. We're the Avengers.
Yeah, let's go. Undefeated BYU, yes, 3-0, ranked in the top 15, 3 wins over Power 5 teams. Included in today's show lineup. Is it time to discuss, Jarom, something even bigger?
Show my shirt here, okay?
More special.
Show my shirt.
More hyped up.
Hey.
I know several of you are like, don't go there. Just focus on USF.
Hype train. I'm on board.
Jarom's on board for the hype train. Even Jarom's on board for the hype train.
Winning the national No, not that far. Come on.
ESPN's Trevor Matich will discuss where he stands on expectations for this season now that BYU's 3-0. And how exactly did BYU pull off that win over Arizona State? Because it was a weird game. In fact, for about half of the game, I felt like BYU was losing. And they never even trailed into the game. They haven't trailed all season.
That's right. That's a fact.
Bring on today's BYU Sports Nation headlines.
If you didn't hear in the beginning of the show here, number 23 BYU football beats number 19 Arizona State 27-17 to improve to 3-0, led by the Cougars forcing 4 turnovers. There were 2-on-1 play. It was weird. Cougars jumped from 23 to 15 in the AP poll, the largest jump of anybody this week. Jaren Hall went 15 of 27, 214 passing yards, 2 TDs, his first 2 turnovers in pick fashion as a Cougar. He did leave the game with what he called the wind being knocked out of him. Baylor Romney came in through the game-sealing TD pass to Isaac Rex for a second of the day. Here's Coach Kalani Sitake on Romney.
I said I felt good with all those quarterbacks. I think they can help us win games. I've seen the quarterback depth on our team. I trust A-Rod. A-Rod trusts Baylor, and he made that throw.
Romney tried to self-sack by stumbling. He got out of that. And then threw a ball that, which was pretty funny in the postgame. It was revealed that Sitake said, don't throw that unless it's wide open.
Yes.
And it wasn't, but he threw it anyway.
Baylor's running back onto the field, and Coach Sitake, Fessy, says, don't throw the ball unless he's wide open.
He wasn't. BYU hosts South Florida Saturday night, 10:20 Eastern.
Ryan Rico. You said he's the best player on the BYU football team, Jarom.
He is.
Named to the Ray Guy Award watch list that honors the nation's most outstanding college football punter. He ripped off an 83-yard punt on Saturday, a new BYU football record.
Incredible.
83 yards.
Pretty good.
Tough to get much longer than that, right? You've got to be on like the 2-yard line.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have a full swing, so maybe we'll see a longer one. Cougars in the NFL. Zach Wilson had a bad day. Threw 4 picks. Jets lost 25-6 to the Patriots. Tyson Williams, 13 carries, 77 yards for the Ravens, who beat Daniel Sorensen's Chiefs Great Sunday Night Football game, 36-35. Williams fumbled at the goal line, but it was recovered for a TD. Fred Warner and the Niners beat the Eagles 17-11. Warner had a TFL. Jamal Williams playing the ex-girlfriend tonight in the Lions versus Packers Monday Night Football game. And this just in this morning, Marty Hodges' dad, Tristan, what's up? Says he is signed with the Browns.
Hey, good for Tristan.
That's exciting.
All right. I'm starting J Swag Daddy in my fantasy football team for the first time ever.
Nice.
Usually he gets drafted because I'm in leagues with a bunch of BYU fans, and he'll get taken earlier, than he probably should.
Yeah.
He's finally on my team.
Nice.
See what he does. BYU women's volleyball ranked number 15th in the country. Number 15 was the operative ranking right now. Sweeps Utah Valley 25-16, 25-18, 25-20, and improved to 10-1 on the season. Kenzie Kerber continues her superlative season, 18 kills. Whitney Bauer had 37 assists.
I anticipate BYU move up a couple of spots after beating Utah. Number 18 women's soccer lost to Utah State 2-1 in overtime. This was a shocker. The Cougars had 30 shots and dropped their third game of the season. Super weird game at Southfield.
It's a weird sport because they outshoot Utah State 30-6 and lose.
10 saves for D.R. Walton, the Utah State keeper. She was
incredible. BYU women's golf competing at the Mercedes-Benz Collegiate Championship in Knoxville, Tennessee today. Good luck to their star, Leela Naliai, and the rest of the crew. All rise and shout. It's time for What's Trending.
You're talking about it, and so are we. It's What's Trending on BYU Sports Nation.
BYU victorious by 10 points over Arizona State. The Cougar defense has now held their 3 Power 5 opponents to 16 points, 17 points, and 17 points. And they've gone over 24, or at least 24, in all 3 of those wins.
Hey, Bronco.
Right? That stat is back and relevant to Cougars. In a lot of ways, are the talk of major college football. Jarom, like I said earlier, it was kind of a weird game. And I kept looking at the scoreboard like, oh, yeah, BYU is still winning this game. What was the determining factor in BYU knocking off, at the time, number 19, Arizona State?
There's a million things that it could be. I think it's Tyler Algier. I think it was his tough running, especially in the second half. He finishes with 69 yards, only 3.3 a carry, but in the second half, there were some runs that got BYU some critical first downs, this long 5-minute drive to seal the game later, and of course, the play he made, which probably saved the game, right? It felt like it did in the moment. You could also credit the crowd, specifically the Rock. The fact that Arizona State... 16 penalties. Just
16.
Just so undisciplined. 4 false starts on a single drive. That one where they're backed up against the Rock, and the Rock really brought it. Oh, you were so good. You were so good, Rock. Keep bringing that energy to every game. I know it's going to be hard when it's not a ranked team. It's not Utah. It's not Arizona State. It's South Florida. Just act like it's Florida. South Florida. Coming to town Saturday night. There were so many key people and things that happened here. Aaron Roderick as well. Second half, BYU can't run the ball. First half, BYU can't run the ball. Second half, BYU can. Just really open that up. And then hopefully, by the way, Jaron Hall's okay. And hopefully Keenan Peely's okay. But you have to wonder. Jaron Hall did say he just got the wind knocked out of him. That's great news. I hope there's no lingering effects there.
The turnover battle, once again, favors BYU. Arizona State turns it over 4 times, including the opening kickoff. I mean,
Talmadge Gunther.
The place went absolutely bonkers. Yeah, Talmadge Gunther, one of those guys that was featured prominently in the Built Bar reveal for giving scholarships to walk-on players.
Yeah.
He makes the play, the tackle punches it out, and BYU recovers and is up 7-0, essentially 1 minute into the game. So that kind of started BYU's momentum, but 4 turnovers. BYU gives it up twice. You go +2. Jaron, that's a recipe for success.
Yeah, great pick by Malik Moore. And BYU was ready. Just great. Peyton Wilgar just upends the guy hard, and then
Max Tooley
out of the air. Yep, great stuff there. Yeah.
BYU was very opportunistic. In fact, the first 2 turnovers that they forced, they scored touchdowns on both of those. And then you brought up the 16 penalties. Now do you believe me? How many times last week, BYU Sports Nation, did I tell you? Arizona State is super talented. They always have athletes on the outside in the skill positions. They're super speedy, but they just do not play disciplined football. 16 penalties. This is why they consistently underachieve. This team is good enough to win the Pac-12 South.
Well, BYU is the Pac-12 South leader right now. So.
3-0.
Yeah.
Okay. So technically, yeah, BYU are the de facto South leaders, but Arizona State I think they're the best team in the Pac-12 South right now.
Because, I think it's Arizona who lost to Northern Arizona.
Because UCLA, Jarom, the Bruins are going to Bruin. They lost Fresno State at home. Congratulations, UCLA. It was an awesome 2 weeks.
Who is the best team? You think it's Arizona State still?
I think it's Arizona State.
I wonder if Corner Canyon's Jackson Dart and USC will have a rebound.
Maybe. It's all up in the air.
It ain't Utah who lost San Diego State.
I think Arizona State's defense, really good. Really physical. BYU finally wore them down in the fourth quarter and did something they've been doing like every game when you need to have a drive and you need to hold on to the ball. BYU's been able to do that in the fourth quarter.
Yep.
These long, sustained drives that result in points with just a few minutes left in the game.
Yes, massive drive at the end, right? It's a 4-point game. It's 21-17. BYU needs at least a field goal. And on third down, BYU gets aggressive and throws the ball with the backup. That was the only pass on that drive, by the way. And it was from the backup Baylor Romney, who in his mind is the starter, right?
So I love that Baylor Romney reveals, like, yeah, coach told me not to throw the ball unless he was wide open, but I still threw it.
Ain't no backup mentality. I ain't gonna throw it. He's there to make a play, man.
And then Isaac Rex said, "Yeah, coach did say that, but I'm glad I caught it."
The elk stuck out his antlers and caught that one. Come on, man.
I told Byron Rex, "Hey, I don't know if you've heard this, but he wasn't supposed to throw it unless Isaac was open." And he's like, "Really? Wait, did Isaac reveal that? Tell me Isaac didn't reveal that." I'm like, no, Baylor told me. He's like, "Okay, good, fair enough."
What a play! It's so gutsy. But then again, you think if he's not wide open, you know who's almost always wide open? Isaac Rex, because he's 6'6" and super athletic in the end zone and had 12 touchdowns last year.
Yeah, so he scores 12 touchdowns.
Yes.
And he said, "But I never really got to celebrate a big touchdown with the home fans." So he's like,
"Yeah.
I did it twice today," and he's like, "It was amazing."
Yes, I'm excited to break this down in the film room with him coming up tomorrow night on the Satake Show. Topic 2. Does BYU deserve to be ranked higher than 15th?
No, I think number 15 is very fair. BYU was the high mover in this week's AP poll. They jumped 8 spots from 23 to 15. Where do you want to put them? Maybe above Iowa State, who is 2-1, but Iowa
State has 2 ranked wins. Indiana and Iowa State. Sorry, they lost to Iowa.
They lost to Iowa.
They have 1 ranked win.
So they're 2-1. I mean, maybe BYU gets bumped up to number 14. Someone joked, I can't remember which BYU fan it was, but it's nice to see that Iowa State with 1 loss is still being consistently ranked. That quality loss is still better than BYU's 3 wins.
Iowa has 2 ranked wins. Excuse me. Okay, obviously not Bama. Bama is Bama. Georgia beat Clemson. Oregon beat Ohio State. Penn State has 2 ranked wins. Wisconsin and Auburn. Iowa has 2 ranked wins. Then it gets interesting, though, right? Penn State beat Auburn. That's a good one.
Texas A&M has looked really good.
Wisconsin. Texas A&M has looked good, but doesn't have a ranked win, right? Kent State, Colorado, New Mexico. Cincinnati beat Miami of Ohio, Murray State, and Indiana. Clemson's Clemson. So if you took off the logos and just looked at the resume, yes, BYU should be higher. But in these polls, there's always the brand.
Well, that's why Pat Forty in his power poll has BYU at number 7.
Yes, I agree with that idea. But in a poll like this, you're always going to have the history taken into account. Program prestige. Like Notre Dame, BYU should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Florida State in overtime, Toledo and Purdue. No, BYU's 3 wins, all Power 5, 2 against ranked teams, are better than Notre Dame. They have Rudy and Touchdown Jesus and the 4 Horsemen, so they're ranked above BYU.
You know what's great? Notre Dame and Cincinnati are going to somehow figure that all out when they play each other in a couple of weeks. One of those teams is going down.
Is it this week?
They go head-to-head.
Can't remember.
No. Cincinnati has a
2
bye.
2 weeks. Okay.
That's
going to be a fun game.
Assuming BYU handles their business against USF.
South Bend, I think.
And then the Cougars get a win in Logan against Utah State. BYU would be 5-0 going into that Saturday when Cincinnati and Notre Dame go head-to-head. Week 6 has a ton of really fascinating, highly ranked matchups. BYU keeps winning. Like, those teams, by default, a few of those teams are just going to drop and lose.
Yeah, and if BYU beats South Florida, it should. What's the line, 23.5? And then Utah State, 3-0 right now with a win at Washington State, so they're feeling good. That should be interesting. Shades of 2014, as you brought up Saturday. 4-0 BYU ranked in the top 15.
Well, BYU was number 18 the night they hosted Utah State.
Right, so it's even worse because BYU's better.
They're exercising demons this season. This is the season of exercising demons, Jarom.
Yeah.
BYU breaks the streak against Utah. Okay, ended that. Oh, no, game number 3, all whites. This team reminds us of 96.
Washington.
In 96, they wore all whites against the Pac-12 team and lost.
BYU's exercising literal devils in white? Okay.
Yes. Okay, they're exercising.
Also,
USF, the Vengeance match, they're going to exercise those demons in 6 days.
Story time. First sundown, my mission. My companion goes running into a room with 2 other elders. Comes out a couple minutes later. I was like, hey, what's going on? He's like, oh, we just exercised a demon. And I was like, whoa! Thanks for not inviting me in there. Jeez.
Okay.
So BYU football trying to do the same, I guess, this year.
It's the season of exercising demons. So BYU wins in Logan against Utah State. Exercise those demons 5-0.
Well, Jaron Hall, Baylor Romney feel like there ain't no demons to exercise here.
That's true.
We went up here 2 years ago.
Granted, so Utah State, you may not know this, they have switched the team's sidelines at Maverick Stadium this year. So BYU will be right in front of the herd Utah State student section this year.
BYU
is going to advantage.
BYU is going to practice right next to a farm next week just to get used to sort of that smell, that environment, so that they are not thrown off by that.
Okay. I mean, so to answer your question, yeah, I think 15 is fine. Where would you put them? Would you jump them up a couple of spots specifically?
A couple, yeah. I don't think BYU deserves to be 7th in the country right now. But if you're the resume argument person, then yeah. But I get it that BYU's 15th. Kind of off cam, we were talking with Steve Young last week, and he felt like, hey, BYU should be a little higher right now. I can see that argument as well. Listen, if BYU keeps winning, everything's going to be fine.
Yes.
It's not last year because it's not last year's schedule. BYU's going to play 7 Power 5s. If BYU is actually like undefeated late in the year, BYU will be in a position to be in the playoff. But I still feel like there's a couple losses on there. I'm super excited about where BYU's at, but let's be honest. There are some notable injuries already, and let's see how it goes. Let's just enjoy this journey while it happens.
Yeah, it's not last year, but interestingly enough, in week 3, BYU was ranked number 15 last year, and in week 3 this year, they're ranked number 15.
Well, then that's messed up. BYU should be higher because the schedule is very different.
BYU's doing some special things, which brings us to our Monday stat of the day.
It's the BYU Sports Nation stat of the day.
With 14 wins and 1 loss, only Alabama has a better record than BYU, 16-0, since the beginning of last season. I know. BYU played a bunch of cupcakes last year. They've won 3 straight Power 5 games. Can we put that argument to rest right now?
Just as long as BYU's ranked ahead of Coastal Carolina, I'm good.
Anytime the Chanticleers are shants down compared to BYU, it is a great day. What's up, Conway, South Carolina? Hope you're having a great day.
Yeah.
By the way, Kelly Ford most deserving rankings. So this is just meritocracy.
Yes.
Based on results.
Yes.
BYU number 9 on what they've accomplished this season.
Yeah. No. 2 ranked wins, 3 P5 wins.
We've
never seen this from BYU.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Our question of the day. Is it too early to start talking about a possible 12-0 season for BYU? We didn't start the conversation, for the record.
What? Andy Staples started it.
Goggle alert.
Just so we are all on the same page here.
Let's go to Voice of the Nation.
This is the Voice of the Nation on BYU Sports Nation.
At AC_Hutchins on Twitter. If BYU's able to get to 11-0, then let's talk about the possibility of a 12-0 season.
I'll be happy if BYU's 6-0.
Until then, it's always too early. Also, Cougs are going 12-0. At Roberts_MN on Twitter says, looks at calendar, sees that General Conference is still nearly 2 weeks away. Yep, still too early. It's nice to be ranked ahead of Coastal Carolina, though.
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, listen, BYU's going to be 5-0 hosting Boise State. BYU's going to beat South Florida. BYU's going to beat Utah State and Logan. Granted, that's going to be a tougher game than we kind of thought from the beginning
Utah
of the year.
State's offense
Blake
can
Anderson's
score.
doing a nice job up there as new head coach. Yeah. Okay, coming up. I can't even say it without laughing. Is it too early to talk 12-0?
Oh, man. ESPN's Trevor Matich will address the potential of a very special season for BYU and how he thought the Cougars got the job done against Arizona State. This is BYU Sports Nation.
12-0.
I know what it's like to be overlooked, to be doubted, to fly under the radar. I only had one offer coming out of high school, but I was ready for every moment, every opportunity, and every shot that I got. Now I'm playing professional basketball, aiming to be one of the best shooters on the planet. And I'm just getting started. Be ready for your moment with Rapid Reboot, the future of rapid recovery.
That's our job. We got to take care of the football and move the team down the field and get the ball in the end zone.
They're just raising the level of play of everybody around them.
And we're moving forward, so hopefully things stick.
If you're a fan of BYU football, then you can't miss Coordinator's Corner. Join host Greg Wrubell as he interviews BYU's football coordinators. Coordinator's Corner, live on BYU TV or on the BYU TV app.
BYU Sports Nation is presented by the BYU Store, official outfitter of BYU fans everywhere.
Yo, how'd 3-0 happen? How'd Arizona State, that win happen? South Florida coming up. Greg Wrubell sits down with Aaron Roderick and Ed Lamb in Coordinator's Corner. Coming up at the top of the hour on the BYU TV app, 1 Eastern time.
We are live in Studio B. This is your day-to-day BYU Sports play-by-play. I am Spencer Linton. That is Jarom Jordan. And the questions that you just presented, you also presented to our good friend from ESPN, Trevor Matich.
That's exactly right. Conversation about Arizona State. Not much about South Florida. Lots to discuss. Here's my conversation earlier today with Trevor Matich. Trevor, 3-0 for BYU, ranked 15th. Life's good right now for BYU.
Life is awesome. Enter into the Big 12 coming up in a couple of years. 3-0 against 3 Power 5 teams. I don't think there's any other team in the country that's 3-0 right now against all Power 5. 2 of them ranked at the time they played them. And so if you're a BYU fan, right now is the time for tremendous hope, and the team is validating that hope.
Okay, we'll talk about the 12-0 kind of discussion in a second, but first, let's break down this game. This was an Arizona State team that was ranked 19th, brought in a lot of speed, Jane Daniels. BYU's defense again shows up, you know, a sub-20 allowed performance again, and BYU gets the win with some real drama late.
There was drama late, and I'll tell you, the defense did what they had to do. You're right about this Arizona State team. They had almost everybody coming back. They've got NFL guys all over that roster, coached by an NFL staff, and they've got lots of speed, lots of playmakers, and the BYU defense did a good job of not letting them break loose, especially their quarterback, Jaden Daniels, who is a true star in the Pac-12. He normally averages just under 100 yards per game rushing. He was held way below that by the BYU defense. He wasn't able to affect drives with his legs the way he normally does. That's one of the reasons that while Arizona State moved the ball between the 20s, BYU was able to clamp down and keep them from converting yards into touchdowns. So that the defense was just absolutely magnificent in this game against a truly dangerous, explosive offense, as we will see as Arizona State goes through the rest of their season.
Yeah, you look at the the net 8 yards rushing for Daniels, which was pretty shocking. Okay, let's talk about the influence of penalties on this game too. Arizona State had 16, including 4 false starts on 1 drive. The BYU student section, the Rock was amazing in that corner of the end zone. Arizona State was pretty undisciplined, but I feel like the crowd had a massive impact on this game. What did you see?
The crowd was magnificent. I mean, these are a bunch of people that largely are reverent on Sundays, not so much on Saturdays. They went, and it was great. And the thing is, every time there was a false start on Arizona State, it egged on the crowd. It got them even more fired up because they knew that they were influencing the outcome of this game. I mean, there was that 4th quarter drive where I think they had 4 false starts in the same drive. And that was massive because BYU was hanging on to a lead at that time. Now, part of that was the crowd. Most of it was the crowd. But let's also look at the big picture of Arizona State. Because of the nature of COVID last year, for them and for everybody, they didn't play in front of a big crowd. So the offense never had to work with super crowd noise. Now, you try to deal with that in practice by playing super loud music or white noise or something that would make it so you can't hear the quarterback. But it's different when you are in a game situation, because in a game situation, it's not just loud like you can make it in practice with speakers. You can feel the noise like you're at a rock concert standing in front of the speaker. It reverberates through your body. It's actually a physical response. And so that, combined with the fact that you can't hear, combined with the fact that it's been over a year since any of those guys have dealt with this in a game, BYU crowd had an outsized influence on what Arizona State was doing. And keep this in mind, too, that this was a Pac-12 officiating crew. Arizona State was not home cooked on those penalties.
Yeah, it was gnarly. 16 of them in all, which was pretty crazy. And BYU gets the win. Play of the game, maybe the play of the decade. I don't know, maybe a top 10 play in BYU history. It was incredible. Tyler Algier, after an interception from Jaron Hall, chases down a man, grabs his left shoulder, punches the ball out like he's Captain America or something, and Jaron Hall, by the way, hustles down and recovers it. That was one of the greatest plays I've ever seen. I know you loved it too. You said as much on Twitter.
I did. I said that might be the greatest forced fumble in college football history. Might be, because I haven't seen every forced fumble in college football history. But certainly I don't think it's hyperbole to say that it's up there with them. Because first of all, of the time of the game, the impact of the game, that would have been a pick six that Arizona State would have taken the lead with, right? And so it changed momentum, but also the nature of it. Tyler Algier is a big running back. He had a lot of ground to make up to catch the guy who was running for the end zone. On the right sideline, he jumped up on his back, and then while holding himself up there with one arm, he had his sideline side arm, punched that ball out, a massive Braveheart-style punch, and knocked the ball not just out, but into the field of play where his guys would have a chance to recover it. And they did. Jaron Hall never quit on the play after throwing the interception, and he went down there and jumped on that fumble. And so it was a massive impact play for BYU that stopped a massive impact play by the Sun Devils. And the fact that all those things came together for Tyler Algier, the fact that he made up all that ground, that he rode the guy on his back, that he punched the ball intentionally back into the field of play, and that the guy who originally threw the interception that would have been a pick six recovers the fumble. That, to me, is outstanding. And I'll tell you this, it made me think of Kyle Morrell going over the Hawaii line at the goal line, inverted, grabbing Rafael Cherry's jersey on the back of his nameplate, their quarterback, as he was trying to score a touchdown during our national championship run. Now, he is inverted, Kyle Morrell is. He's upside down. He has got the back of the nameplate, and as he comes down on the ground on the Hawaii side of the line, he pulled the quarterback back so he couldn't score on that quarterback sneak. They were held to a field goal on that drive. If it would have been a touchdown, we might have lost that game, probably would have lost that game, and the national championship would not have been. So that was, up until this point, the greatest defensive play I've ever seen, certainly by BYU. This one by Tyler Algier is right up there with it.
And it's a little interesting that a defensive play made by an offensive player, and we'll see, it's a great play, no doubt, but the context of the play will increase in history's eye if this season goes really well. So let's talk about it. BYU's 3-0, way ahead of schedule. I think ambitious fans were calling for 2-1 in the first three. Now BYU's in business. South Florida this week, Utah State after that, Boise State, Baylor. It gets tougher. It gets a little easier this week, but it gets tougher later too. Is it too early to talk 12-0 at this point, Trevor?
It is too early for the team. The team needs to be focused on this rep in this practice drill. That's it. If the team focuses on the big picture, they're going to lose the focus that got them to 3-0. And they know that, and they will focus on the moment. But from a fan standpoint, not too early at all. I mean, it seemed insurmountable to win 3 Power 5 games, 2 of them teams that were ranked at the time BYU played them, and be 3-0 sitting at this spot. It just seemed like, okay, well, that's theoretically possible, but I don't know. Now it's a reality. It's real. And the thing is, the BYU should be favored in every game going forward, except maybe the USC game at the end of the season. Their quarterback, Jackson Dart, backup, came in for Keaton Slovis against Washington State on Saturday and lit it up. And so USC, I think, is going to be a very dangerous team. But there are other dangerous teams, too, that BYU will be favored over. They'll be favored over Boise State, but Boise State is really good. They'll be favored over Baylor, but Baylor can pound the ball, and their defensive coaching mindset is one of the best in college football. I mean, this is still a really tricky, really difficult schedule. But BYU now, from a fan standpoint, it's okay to look at what's in front of the Cougars and think, you know what, we can get to that USC game undefeated. And if we do, it's anybody's game to be undefeated at the end of the regular season. It is a possibility. But once again, let's make sure to differentiate between fans' hope and players' needs.
At what point in 1984 did the team start thinking about the possibility of going undefeated?
You know, we opened up with Pitt, Jarom, and at Pitt, all the way across the country. We're looking at a team that had a whole bunch of NFL guys. They had at least one Heisman candidate, and probably two. And they were ranked in the top 5, I believe, at the time we played them. And so we weren't thinking anything about undefeated season. We were thinking only about Pitt. We knew we could move the ball. We knew we could interfere with their offense. But to have the hubris to think that, yeah, we're going to beat them and go undefeated, we didn't begin to have that. We had a good professional humility, I think, as we were going out there, and we stayed focused in the moment. But when Adam Haysbert caught that touchdown pass from Robbie Bosco, and we won that game, on the plane home, all of a sudden we started thinking, you know what? Now that we're past that obstacle, we can sweep this thing. And we started thinking that way. Now, we didn't talk about it much, at least I didn't with people. We still stayed focused on the moment. But the possibility became real with the win over Pitt. Just like now, the possibility becomes real for these Cougars going 3-0 against the schedule.
Fun fact, Adam Haysbert's brother is Dennis, the All-State guy, President, Palmer from 24. Fun fact. And then I love professional humility. That's a phrase I'm going to start using. That's a good one, man.
You know, it's what you need, but that's what this culture is. Listen, this BYU culture was forged in the COVID year of last year, where no one knew if they would play. They were the only team west of the Rockies, I think, that were playing for a while. And they had to kind of make it up as they went along. They didn't have a conference to tell them what to do. They were doing things the way that they felt was right based on the science and based on what was best for the team. And the team came together in a way that I've never seen on any team before. I mean, it was astonishing the way these guys took a brotherhood and made it even stronger. And I think that's one of the reasons that they were able to be successful so much at the beginning of this season, is that brotherhood. So I don't think they will elevate their eyes above the moment, which is what they need to focus on, because they won't let each other. They're too focused on their family.
We're talking with ESPN's Trevor Matich, former BYU All-American as well. Trevor, with this schedule and this team, we certainly looked at it and thought, okay, we're going from 0 Power 5s to 7. And if BYU can hang in this schedule, and so far so good, this is certainly a team and program that's ready for the Big 12, where you will play 8 or 9 Power 5 games. There's 7, Power 5s, 3 in the bag, 4 left. Do you feel like BYU can go 3-1 or 4-0 in those? And how tough will it be against Baylor, Virginia, Washington State, and USC?
They certainly have the talent. You know, Baylor has one of the best quarterbacks in the country that people don't talk about in Brennan Armstrong. They are a well-coached, solid team. I mean, Bronco Mendenhall, former BYU coach, Robert Anae, former BYU offensive coordinator, and so many other former BYU coaches on that Virginia staff. They will be recognizable for BYU fans in terms of how they play. A disciplined brand of football, very tough, very physical, a really hard out. And so BYU still has a long way to go. So what do they have to do in order to get there? Well, they've got to stay healthy. I mean, they've got some real injury issues with guys that are either banged up or worse on all 3 levels of the defense. They have had some injury issues on offense. Fortunately, Gunnar Romney is back, and that's a good thing. Jaron Hall should be okay. We'll see how that goes. So first of all, stay healthy. Second of all, really the offense needs to play 4 full quarters. They have done enough to win. They've made some really great plays that look great on the highlight film, but let's not forget that they also have had way too many 3-and-outs. As a matter of fact, after that first short touchdown, after the special teams play gave them that short field, the next 3 drives were 3-and-out for BYU's offense. And on first down, they combined on those 3 drives of 3 yards. That's it. 3 yards combined on 3 first down plays. on those 3 and outs. And so the offense needs to do better at getting yards on first down in order to be able to get to where they want to go, because the defense is really playing like crazy. But now with guys banged up a bit, they need to be on the sideline a lot more than they have been on the sideline. The good news is that the offense has the personnel to do it. The offensive line is playing lights out. We know the running back stable is fantastic. The receivers, as they develop chemistry with Jaron Hall in the passing game, will be the difference. It's that chemistry in the passing game to make sure that on first down, they're getting the yards that they need in order to stay even with the chains, and then continue to hit the downfield plays that'll take this offense where it needs to go. So let's not put on BYU the 2019 or LSU offense right now. They're not there yet. What they do have is the ability to build it up. They have the personnel, they have the work ethic, they have the coaches, but now they need to get it on the field, because having so many 3 and outs is not going to be a formula for winning against the Power 5 teams that remain on this schedule, and against teams like Boise State in the rivalry against Utah State. And
the only good news about a 3 and out is that BYU rolls out, in my opinion, the best player on the team, Ryan Rico. He punts an 83-yarder, Trevor, the longest punt in BYU history. Rico's 4th in the country right now in punt average. This guy's unbelievable. He's got an NFL leg. I think BYU will be lucky to have him for as long as they have him. He flips the field, and really he's done his defense so much good, because when the offense would get stuffed on those 3 and outs from time to time, and then look really good other times on offense. I'm not saying the offense isn't good. It is. They just need to be more consistent. Then Rico booms those punts, flips the field, and gives the defense a long field to defend. And remember, go back to Arizona State. They had over 400 yards total offense. Arizona State moved the ball. But by not allowing them a lot of huge chunk plays, BYU's defense made Arizona State be consistent and not get behind the chains. And as they move the ball, then all of a sudden BYU would make a play, or Arizona would make a penalty, and they would end up off the field, or at least not scoring a touchdown. And that happened in part because Rico gave the defense such long fields to defend. I mean, you could make a good case that he's been the MVP of this team so far. That's quite the statement, especially for a punter, which is awesome. I love it. Trevor, we appreciate the time. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, Jarom.
ESPN's Trevor Matich on BYU Sports Nation with Jarom Jordan. He says it's okay to start thinking about a really special season. You cool with that?
I'll let her put these on, yeah.
Coming up, train shirts on, the blue goggles are on. Let's go.
Coming up, can we talk about it some more? We're going to. So, yes, 12-0, question mark?
It wasn't us that started it, okay? Following a rough performance yesterday in the NFL.
Started the fire.
Are you all still buying or selling your Zach Wilson stock? This is BYU Sports Nation.
If I got hurt and was laid up at home, I wouldn't even think to call a lawyer. What a hassle. I'd want to meet them first.
What if I told you that for your first consultation, your lawyer will come to you, home or hospital?
Really?
Really.
They do that?
If you've been injured, we'll come to you. It's your job to get better. It's our job to deal with the insurance companies.
Learn more at siegfriedandjensen.com.
Hi, Spencer Linton here, letting you know when your company joins the BYU team as a corporate partner, your brand can be featured in sports programming on BYU TV and BYU Radio. In addition to all of the great games, you can be part of the BYU coaches shows, place your message in Countdown to Kickoff, basketball pre- and post-game shows, and each weekday on BYU Sports Nation. We invite your team to join ours and become a corporate sponsor of BYU Athletics. For details, email sponsorship@byu.edu today.
Professor Rock here.
The Food Nanny.
Chandler Scott here.
Samry.
Hey, everyone.
Hello.
I just want to tell you about this amazing,
excellent,
cool account called My Style.
My Style Checking. I'm talking travel points,
gift card, concert tickets.
All just for using my account.
That's My Style.
So check it out.
Give it a shot.
Open your My Style Checking account today.
Familiar with the BYU TV app?
Yes.
I beg your pardon?
Sure, it's got great original TV shows. But it also gives you access to family films for free.
Wow. Awesome!
So gather around, grab some popcorn, and let us do the rest.
It'll be fun.
Watch some of your favorite films anytime, anywhere. With the free BYU TV app.
I like it.
This portion of BYU Sports Nation is presented by Visible Supply Chain Management.
Only throw it if he's open. Ha! After further review, breaks down that play, Tyler Allgeier's incredible play, and many others tomorrow on After Further Review on the BYU TV app at 7 Eastern Time.
He is Jarom. I'm Spencer. This is BYU Sports Nation. To interact with the show and get great content throughout your day, follow us on our social media platforms that include Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. For now, let's whip it. The Cougar Whip Around, presented by Visible Supply Chain Management, tackling America's most challenging shipping problems.
Jaron Hall's behind the back pass, intentional or no?
I think it was intentional. He's a very, very intelligent human being, and in that moment, he thought, you know what? It's supposed to be a screen pass to Lopini Katoa. I glance these to my left. Yeah, why not? And there's like spin coming off of his finger to suggest that that was an intentional pass. What do you think?
Totally intentional. Absolutely. Patrick Mahomes, eat your heart out. Even PM hasn't tried that one yet.
Zach Wilson thought that was pretty cool, right?
Yes, he did.
The ability to improvise. All right, Jarom, do you give more credit to the Roar of Cougars student section or to Arizona State's undisciplined nature for those 16 penalties on Saturday night?
In my completely biased opinion, The Rock. Yeah, they were awesome, man. And louder, louder, louder. The whole crowd was amazing. I'm telling you, again, I mean, no offense by this phrase, when the white hairs are standing up, it's a special time at LES.
Everybody's excited. There were, correct me if I'm wrong, 4 procedure penalties in that sequence where Arizona State was
all false starts
right in front of the Rock. 4. And a bunch of Arizona State fans were tweeting out, BYU student section is quite literally shutting down the Arizona State offense. They are winning the game for BYU. So I give them, they're the reason the penalty number got to 16.
Most penalties by an opponent since Mississippi State in 2000 at LaBelle Edwards Stadium. Crazy.
Ugh. Arizona State.
Brett McMurphy has BYU playing Cincinnati in the Fiesta Bowl in his latest bowl projections. You like?
I love the idea of BYU being in a New Year's Six bowl game for the first time ever. I don't care who the opponent is. BYU Cincinnati be fun. Hey, a preview of future Big 12 conference foes? That'd be amazing. Yes.
Yeah, I love it. I think it'd be awesome. I'd take it right now.
You know what I like even more? The fact that McMurphy said, even if BYU's 11-1, I'd still put him in a New Year's Six bowl.
There's a chance. You got to beat USC to finish strong.
Right now, are you buying more or selling your Zach Wilson stock after a rough 4-interception performance in his second NFL start yesterday?
Again, in my biased opinion, I would buy a ton of this because, yes, this is going to be one of the worst performances he's ever had, if not that he will ever have.
It's silly to react after 2 weeks because the narrative after his first game was, wow, he battled back in the second half. Finished 20 for 37. His offensive line did him no favors. He was still making awesome throws. Yes, I'm holding on to my stock, and yeah, I'm going to buy more because a bunch of Jets fans are just selling their stock. I can get it for cheap right now. I'm buying more on Zach Wilson. Let's go.
I told you a couple weeks ago he'd have a 3-pick game. It was worse, 4 picks. But yeah, he'll have games like this because Jets suck. That's why. Also, he's going to get better. All good. Coming up, our prop pick results.
We have a lot of strong opinions on the following question. How realistic is it to entertain an undefeated BYU football season? This is BYU Sports Nation.
It's not too early because we're going to do it.
And BYU made such a difference in our lives, I think really helped mold us as to who we are. And so when we had that opportunity and came back to Boise and found out there was an active chapter, we thought, okay, that's something that I can really get behind and get involved in.
We want to promote the BYU experience all over the region. We want people who leave BYU to still stay connected.
Tim Daly Ford in Spanish Fork offers a large inventory of Ford vehicles, including a selection of cars and trucks, providing a range of transportation choices. From the Ford Fusion sedan and the Edge crossover SUV to a range of pickups including the F-150. Each product line comes with options to enhance performance, comfort, and safety. Think Ford, think Tim Daly Ford in Spanish Fork.
On the next relative race, JT sees himself in a new relative.
Can't believe this.
Jarrell receives a true family-style welcome.
You're a part of us, and we love you.
And Steven and the twins are both faced with difficult truths.
I feel like you're here for her. You're here at her place.
There's a 4 in 5 chance that my father's already gone.
BYU Sports Nation is presented by the BYU Store, official outfitter of BYU fans everywhere.
Check out BYU Football at Columbus Take tomorrow night, 8:30 Eastern on the BYU TV app as the coach recaps the big win against Arizona State, previews South Florida. Isaac Rex is in the film room, and Peyton Wilgar is the Deep Blue, a story that has not been told with Peyton quite yet, which is just wild.
Welcome back to BYU Sports Nation live from Studio B. It is time to break open the conversation of conversations on this Overreaction Monday, Jarom. And it's presented by Andy Staples.
He's sponsoring it?
Well, sorry.
I understand.
He presented the idea first,
gotcha.
I should clarify. And he did so on Saturday night. I quote a tweet from Mr. Staples.
Brothers.
They're showing BYU's remaining schedule graphic on ESPN. Mm-hmm. How would we feel about a 12-0 BYU? Because that seems plausible. End quote. Jarom, as a national writer starting that conversation, is it too early to entertain and talk about 12-0 for BYU?
Entertain? No, we have a sports talk show. We should entertain it. The reality is I don't believe BYU is actually going to go undefeated. I just think it's too tough of a schedule. I think BYU is going to get beat up. There's going to be a couple injuries to change some things. That's all good. This can still be an amazing season, and it will be, and it has been so far. This is the year BYU got into the Big 12 and beat Utah. It's already been an amazing season.
And started 3-0, and they're number 15 in the country.
It's great. BYU's been in this position before where they kind of start strong, get high, and then kind of go down from there. That's whatever. BYU's going to win the next 2 games. Boise State's going to be a tough home game. I still think BYU wins that. And then you go 4 Power 5s in the final 6. That's going to determine how BYU does. And 3 of those 4 Power 5s, by the way, are on the road.
Okay.
So I still have BYU for a couple losses. But if BYU somehow got to that 10-win mark in the regular season, that'd be unbelievable. Because then you think, okay, BYU's ready for the Big 12, where you're playing 8 or 9 Power 5s a year, and there's been some balance, and then you can handle that and have a 9 or 10-win season. And that's where BYU takes a step, because I expect BYU to be on average an 8-5 team in the Big 12. It's going to be tough. You're playing a tougher schedule consistently. You have to build up that depth to be able to handle, like, what's Keenan Pili's situation? That's a massive piece of news that we're waiting to find out officially about.
How's Jaron Hall?
How's Jaron Hall? He said it was just a wind knocked out of him. Hopefully there's no lingering effects there. He was down for a little while.
Tyler Algier okay? Because he was like limping off of the field after the win.
BYU's banged up a little bit. But, ESPN FPI has BYU as a dog at Baylor and at USC. That's it. So we'll see how it goes. But I still think there are a couple losses on there. But it's fun to talk about. It could,
it is.
Like, there's a chance it happens. I just think it's low.
Now, interestingly enough, ESPN's Football Power Index has BYU at Baylor only a 29-point, so 30% chance of winning that game. Yeah. And that number is down from last week. So BYU beats Arizona State, but Baylor looks strong against Kansas, and now FPI says that game's going to be even tougher than we thought. We'll find out who Baylor is this week when they play Iowa State. So a game to keep a very close eye on, Baylor against Iowa State. Also, Virginia at home. This was, until last week, a scenario where BYU was an underdog. Now BYU's 52% chance of winning that game after Virginia loses to North Carolina. And then USC, this number's way down. It was a 33% chance for BYU to win, down to 27%. Is Jackson Dart the hero that the Trojans need after Jackson Dart beat a very mediocre, if not subpar, Washington State team?
Utah State went up there, so it feels like that's a winnable game. At Saban Analytics, that's Paul Saban, who's been on the program, BYU alum, ESPN FPI guru. He said in response to our question of the day about is it too early to talk about 12-0? Yes, 1% chance per FPI. If 7-0 after Baylor, then people can realistically hope.
Okay.
Even then, I think it would be tough because you'd feel like I feel like BYU can win every game on the schedule. There's not one where I go, no way. Like you remember 2017 preseason against Wisconsin, I was like, there's no way. It's the 4th Power 5 game in a row. It's week 4. Like, no, BYU's going to be beat up and Wisconsin's too good. I don't necessarily feel that way. Although I am concerned in the back half of the season playing 4 Power 5s, 3 on the road, about the depth. Hopefully BYU's in a good health situation to be able to handle it. Because when BYU's healthy, we've seen that they can be really stinking good.
Yes, we've adjusted our expectations after every game that BYU has played this year. ESPN says 9-3 is the projected win-loss total. Awesome. It feels like 10-2 to me.
I'd be happy about 9-3 because that means you have a chance at 10 wins to end the season.
I'm just telling you.
At 3-0, what?
We said last week, I said specifically last week, if BYU beats Arizona State, then I feel like BYU is going to win 10 games in the regular season. It's moved to that. Like, I expect them to win 10 games now.
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet, but I'm like at the 9.5. Right.
Okay.
So who is it? Who is that? I don't know. I don't know.
It's going to be weird, okay?
Yes,
because it's homecoming there.
Yes.
Like, there's a lot of hoopla. If BYU is a top 10 team going into that game. Are they like a high school
that still likes homecoming? Is that homecoming still a thing?
It's a huge deal. Like,
people like homecoming still?
It's a big part of why that ticket is the most expensive on the home schedule for Baylor this year. It's a huge tradition, okay? So there's already going to be hype for that. If BYU's undefeated and 6-0, going to Waco, and then you throw in the Jeff Grimes and Eric Mateos thing and the ties there, it's going to be emotional. And you don't think that Baylor fans are going to show out? That's going to be a sellout game against a top 10 BYU team. If the Cougars are 6-0.
Oh, it's even bigger. Like preseason, it was an expensive ticket. Jeez. Let alone like top 10 BYU coming in, maybe.
Yeah, it's probably too early, but let's get to Baylor, see if BYU's undefeated, and then we'll go from there.
If BYU gets to November undefeated, like Idaho State, Georgia Southern, USC, it's like, yes, BYU should win Idaho State and Georgia Southern matchups, but at USC, woo, that's a doozy to end the season.
We'll see what the Trojans are by the end of the season.
But it's a real. No matter what, it'll be a big win. No matter what, even if they're 5-6 at the time, seriously, because of the brand. Coming up, Rise and Shoutouts.
And our prop pick recap. This is BYU Sports Nation. Just beat USF. I can hear all of you now. One game at a time.
What are you, Coach Satake? Get out of here.
This is where we dominate. Our playground, place of business. This is our promised land, where we seek to find ourselves. And we're here to make sure the spaces our best prove themselves on appear how they should. Intermountain Healthcare, official medical provider for BYU Athletics.
Trio Orem Senior Living believes in empowering seniors to live life to the fullest. We help eliminate stress out of daily life when you live at Trio. Less time focusing on housework means you can socialize at one of our many events, with safety in mind, of course. And did we mention our spacious apartments with modern amenities? Learn more about setting up a private tour at trioorem.com.
City needs me.
I bet if I moved in with you, you become president. I have parents. This is just temporary.
This is BYU Football with Kalani Sitake and Greg Wrubell.
When I was younger, I was a better dancer. Don't show any more dancing. Okay, good. I think we've developed some really good habits the last couple of weeks and looking to step it up again. A lot of great things can happen when they care.
Not bad. That's good stuff.
Hey.
Yay.
Yeah, thank you for ending on that one. That was a good one.
This portion of BYU Sports Nation is presented by Mountain America, the official credit union of BYU Athletics.
BYU Sports Nation, always available on demand via the BYU TV and BYU radio apps.
Or download the podcast, Google BYU Sports Nation podcast, subscribe, rate, and review.
Okay, it's time for a prop pick recap from game number 3. BYU hosting Arizona State. You go first, Jarom. Let's recap.
Okay, number of Jaron Hall first quarter completions. Closest to without going over. You said 4. I said 5. He had 1.
Ooh, man.
You win.
Again, it was a weird game. 1 completion in the first quarter for Jaron Hall.
1 completion.
And BYU never trailed.
Weird.
All right, number 2. Who will be BYU's second leading rusher versus Arizona State? Jaron Hall had 38 yards net rushing. So he was second leading rusher. I get the point. Again, without going over, I said 58. You said 59. Jaron rushed for 59 total yards on the number. Gained, but the net, because I know. Nice call, but I still get the point.
Yeah. Number 3, longest Ryan Rico punt.
Yeah, that's a Jarom winner.
You said 50. I said 53. I was off by 30.
Yeah,
still
sorry
winning.
we doubted you, Ryan. Our bad.
Ryan, I got your shirt, I believe.
Holy cow. So after both
so what are we doing next time? We're like, 74.
Yeah. Can you rip off a 72-yarder?
Didn't he have a 68-yarder in this game, too, or something? Or was it the week before yet?
He was the week before.
Insane.
Okay, so after both of us lost to Brian Logan in week 1, and we didn't do prop picks because of the Big 12 situation.
Yeah, we straight didn't do them.
So it's just whatever. I guess I'll take the first official win of the season, which means later this week,
Congratulations.
Jeremy, you will spin the wheel of consequence.
I thought it was the will of consequence.
The will?
Right now.
The will?
The big dill.
The wheel of consequence.
He's the real dill, man.
Our question of the day, is it too early to start talking about a possible 12-0 season for BYU?
No.
Our elite voice of the day, presented by Sundance Mountain Resort at Cougmac. Yes! BYU's played 3 games. Not too early to start talking about 4-0, though.
It's
Hashtag
like
BYUSN.
Coach Mack in the house.
Is anybody really concerned about thinking of a 5-0 or 6-0 BYU team? Come on. Really? You got to go 4-0. USF is terrible. BYU's going to win the game. 17+. I'm doing it. Let's go.
Yeah!
Yes, let's go. Today's Rise and Shout-outs presented by Mountain America, the official credit union of BYU Athletics.
The Rock, the
Yes.
BYU fans, Tyler Algiers play, Baylor Romney coming in, Jaron Hall's guts. Yes, everything. It was amazing.
Another incredible
3-0.
Saturday
I can't
night.
believe it. I cannot believe it. It's fantastic.
All right, our thanks to today's guest, Trevor Matich. He's not afraid to talk about potential 12-0.
No. Sorry to Dennis Pinto. We ran out of time. We just talked about teams that start 3-0. You guys started 1 and 2 sometimes. Conversation continues 24/7. 09? I can't remember. On Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, use hashtag BYU.
Run, Tyler! For Jarom, I am Spencer. Shout out to Brian McKenzie.
Nice.
Stay tuned for Coordinator's Corner on the BYU TV app. Greg Wrubell going to discuss the big win over Arizona State.
Yeah, 09 they lost Florida State.
Yeah.
That's right,
But go Cougs!